In this video, we are going to have a look at the Viltrox 20mm T2.0 lens for the L-mount cameras. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at the Viltrox 20mm T2.0 Cine lens for the L-mount cameras. And just a quick disclaimer before we start, I was sent this sample to work on this review, but I'm not under any obligation to only say positive things about this lens. So in this review, you will hear my honest opinions about this lens. So you definitely hear me talk about the good and bad thing about this product. And let's start the review by talking about the build quality and design of this lens. This Viltrox 20mm lens has a very metal construction. Apart from the lens cap, pretty much everything is made of metal, and it's the very heavy, chunky kind of metal. So when you are holding the lens, it just feels very sturdy. As a prime lens, it is not exactly a small lens, but it's not huge as well. If I compare it with the Lumix 2060, the new kit lens, if you look at it side by side, the size of these two lenses are pretty much the same. However, the weight of these lenses are very different. This 20-60 Lumix is only around 350 grams, while the Viltrox is around 800 grams, so it is like 2.5 times the weight of the Lumix, and that is mostly because of its very solid metal construction. So if you put it onto a Panasonic S1 or S1H, which is quite a big and heavy body, the overall balance is okay. It feels quite balanced actually, but if you are intending to use it with a smaller camera, for example the Sigma FP, then it will probably feel a bit front heavy. Viltrox has previously released two other 20mm prime lenses. One is for the Sony E mount and one is for the Nikon Z mount. I have reviewed the Nikon Z mount on this channel a while ago, and this is the one that I reviewed. I believe optical wise, these two lenses are identical, but Viltrox has made a few changes to the body of the Cine version to make it more suitable for filmmaking. The most obvious changes is that both the focus ring and the iris ring now has gear on it. That is to allow filmmaker to adjust either the focus or the iris setting precisely using follow focus system. The iris ring is at the front of the lens and it goes from T2 all the way to T16, and the total travel is around 90 degrees. It is a declicked ring, which is something that I complained about when I was reviewing the photo version for the Nikon Z mount, but for filmmaking, I don't think anyone will complain about that. Compare it with the photo version, I actually prefer the iris ring on this Cine version more than the aperture ring on the photo version. First reason is that the ring now has gears on it, so even if I'm not using a follow focus system to adjust the iris setting, because of the gear, it allows me to grab and move the iris ring quite a bit easier compared to the photo version. And the second thing is this position of the iris ring is now a little bit more separated compared to the focus ring. If you look at the photo version, these two rings are very close together, and that just make it quite a bit harder to grab hold of the aperture ring on the photo version, and also it's quite easy to just mistakenly move the focus ring instead. This is definitely not a problem with this Cine version because these two are quite apart from each other. And then at the back we have the focus ring, which has a total travel of around 150 degrees or so from the minimum focus distance, which is 0.25 meter, all the way to infinity. The focus ring is very smooth, it's buttery smooth, and it feels just fantastic when you are playing with the focus ring. And there are many focus distance markings on the focus ring, so that should allow you to adjust the focus very accurately. The lens has a 82mm front filter thread, but because the front element is actually a little bit extruded, so you could not just directly install a front filter onto the top of the lens. What you have to do is that Viltrox actually they have supplied two different lens hood for this lens. If you are using the default one, which is this pedal shaped one, you cannot install any front filter onto the lens. So if you want to install the front filter onto it, you do have to remove this standard front lens hood and then install the other lens hood that also comes in with the box. And once you put this one in, and you can now install the front filter onto the front on this lens hood. It's quite an interesting design, and it's good to see Viltrox actually spent the effort to design two different lens hood and also supply both of them with the lens. But it also means that quite often you may need to actually carry both the lens hood with you when you are not sure whether you want to use a front filter or not, because the pedal shaped one does give you better lens flare protection in compared to this rounded one. And also another thing is that the front lens cap would only fit onto this lens hood. So if you have this lens hood mounted on it or no lens hood mounted on it, the front lens cap wouldn't fit onto your lens. This lens is a completely mechanical lens, so there's no autofocus and also no auto aperture and also no optical image stabilizer. If you look at the back of the lens, there is no electronic contacts at all, so there will be no aperture or lens data recorded in the EXIF data. Because it is quite a wide angle lens, so I thought maybe I could use it to do a bit of rocking. So I did a bit of testing and the result is pretty good. The 20mm focal length is about perfect for rocking. It's quite wide, but not wide enough to cause a lot of distortion, and because it's all just completely mechanically controlled, so you can easily just change to all the settings without even looking at the lens, because you can kind of know where you should turn it to. If you stop down the lens to around T5.6 or so, you could just set the focus distance to around 1 meter or so, and then you don't have to worry about focus. And if you want to shoot in the low light condition, you could always open up the aperture or the iris to maximum T2, and then you can also shoot some nice footage under low light. On the other hand, because it is quite a heavy lens, so holding it, especially with a bigger camera like this S1H, your hands will get tired pretty quickly. With this Viltrox 20mm Cine lens, I can see a bit of focus breathing when changing the focus distance. In terms of image sharpness, this lens center sharpness is already very good when I'm shooting at wide open T2. Stop down to T2.8 would improve the center sharpness a little bit, but then the center sharpness doesn't actually improve anymore even if I further stop down the lens. This is very similar to the result that I got when I was testing the Nikon version, which is not really surprising because they should have the same optical performance. The corner sharpness is definitely quite soft at T2. Even when I stop down to T2.8, the corner sharpness improved a little bit, but I think it is still a bit soft. If you want to have good corner sharpness, you would have to stop down the lens to around T4 or T5.6. Next, let's have a look at distortion and look at this brick wall sample photo. If you look at the edge of the photo, you can see there is a bit of distortion. I don't think the distortion is terrible, but for a prime lens, I kind of expected distortion would be a little bit less than that. As a wide angle lens, bokeh is probably not the most important thing, but because it is still a pretty fast lens, so it is still possible to dissolve the background a little bit, especially when you are shooting some close-up objects. And the bokeh quality is actually pretty decent. It's very round and I think it's also quite smooth. And even when you stop down the lens, the bokeh still remained very round, very circle. And that is because the lens has 14 curved aperture break. If you look at the lens when you try to stop it down, you will notice that the aperture hole is actually remained very round, very circle even when you stop it down to T8 or smaller. Chromatic aberration is quite well controlled by this Viltrox 20mm lens. Even when shooting at wide open and shooting some high contrast scene, there is only very minimal amount of color fringing. Lens flare control is also very well. Even when shooting directly into the sun, the amount of lens flare and ghosting is still kept at very minimal level. I do remember when I was testing the Nikon Z version, sometimes when the sun is just outside the frame and then I would see a bit of rainbow color ghosting at the opposite corner of the frame. This is something that I haven't really noticed when I was testing this L-mount Cine version, but since they share the same optical formula, so I wouldn't be surprised if this lens also has this kind of behavior. When shooting at T2, vignetting is quite noticeable. Stop down to T2.8 will improve vignetting quite a bit, but even when I stop it down to T5.6, I could still see a bit of vignetting near the very edge or corner of the frame, so that is a little bit surprising considering this lens has quite a big front element, so I expect the vignetting will be a little bit less noticeable. This Viltrox 20mm T2 lens is a very fun lens to shoot with. The build quality of this lens is very good, very solid, and turning the focus ring and the iris ring when you are shooting just feel absolutely amazing. And I also like how they design two different lens hoods and bundle them all with this lens as well. The center sharpness is very good, bokeh quality is very good, and the lens flare resistance is also very well. But as a cine lens, the amount of focus briefing is a bit more than what I would like to see. A few things that I considered as negative when I was reviewing the photo version, for example the decreased aperture ring or the iris ring and the pretty long 150-degree focus ring travel distance, they are now positive things for a cine lens. For the price of US $499, I think it is pretty reasonable price for a fast wide-angle prime lens with a very solid metal construction, and it is definitely very cheap for a cine lens. Having said that, it is $100 more expensive than the Sony E-mount and the Nikon Z-mount version, and they are pretty much identical lens, apart from the Cine version now has the geared iris and the focus ring and a few cosmetic changes that is for the Cine version. Even the packaging is exactly the same between these lenses. So is it worth the $100 extra price? I think it is something that is debatable, but then for L-mount user, this is the only version that Viltrox has created, so you pretty much have no choice but to buy this one no matter you want the Cine version or not. But if I compare the Cine version and the photo version, I do prefer the Cine version more because the gearing, I just love them because not only it allows me to easily use a follow focus system to control the iris or the focus precisely, even when I'm not using that, the gearing it's just easier to grab hold, and also I just like the slightly further away between the two rings. It just make it a lot easier to change the setting without mistakenly change the other one. And if you are watching this video and watch it till here, you probably have a L-mount camera as well, so I would be quite interested to hear your thoughts about this L-mount lens from Viltrox.